All right, welcome back in. Hang with Hester, presented by Richard's Honda. It's time now for our Monday guest, Aaron Torres, Fox Sports Radio, who joins us here every single Monday to talk NCAA basketball and more. Aaron, how you doing today?
Jacob, I'm doing well. How we all doing today?
Doing good, man. LSU 64, Texas A&M 50. So LSU finds a way to get back in the win column. And you know how it is. Once you're a team that you feel like they're about 95% in the NCAA tournament, but you just got to do a little bit more, you'll take every win you can get, Aaron.
100%. And listen, I'll say this: it was a nice win. Texas A&M has actually been playing really well the last few weeks. And, you know, they're the kind of team, they're just going to play you really tough. And if you don't come out ready to play, they will beat you. And they have beaten some good teams in the SEC this year. They obviously, by the way, gave A&M a ton of trouble when they played in College Station a few weeks ago. So, listen, it's not one that, you know, we're going to, you know, be talking about on Selection Sunday in terms of it got LSU up a seed line or it's one of their best wins. But that's quietly like a pretty good win. And for LSU to lead start to finish, really never really felt like the game was in doubt. I think that's a solid step in the right direction going into the last week of the regular season.
What do you think the ceiling is for this team, and what do you think the floor is? Saying they get into the NCAA tournament, what's the best seed you can see them getting, and what could they fall to?
In terms of seeding or how far they could have been?
Just seeding.
Yeah, you know, I'll be honest, Jacob. I'm not a bracketology guy. It's funny. I'm actually like looking at all the net numbers right now, and even as somebody who follows this stuff day in and day out, some of the net stuff just really, really confuses me. And then the big problem is, Jacob, is that, you know, it's almost like the College Football Playoff Committee, where it's like every week there's kind of a new criteria in college football. And, you know, we decide to move LSU down to number 2 and then back up to number 1 and whatever. And it's the same in basketball, and this has been a complaint within basketball circles for coaches as they try to put together schedule in the offseason and everything like this is, you know, how important is net ranking? How important is how you do in the conference? How important is scheduling? How important is how you do in the out of conference? And by the way, this is why you see LSU play a random neutral court game against USC or play in the tournament in Jamaica, is because neutral court games and away games really do help in the net ranking. And so, you know, listen, I think I've seen LSU basically, you know, somewhere between the 6 line and the 9 line. I mean, listen, you know, I think they're probably going to be a 6 or 7. I mean, if they were to win the SEC tournament, could they get to a 5 seed, maybe a 4? I think that seems reasonable. Without knowing what everybody else has to do, I do think they'll settle on probably that 6-7 line.
When you look across the SEC, Aaron, it just seems like nobody wants to take those last couple NCAA spots from the SEC. Right? Florida loses to Tennessee, and then Arkansas loses by 10 to Georgia. South Carolina goes on the road and loses to Alabama. I don't know how many teams there in the SEC is going to get into the big dance. I mean, all these teams that you feel like are right on the bubble, they continue to pick up bad losses.
100%. It's so funny. I had Jimmy Dykes on my podcast last week, and we actually had this exact same conversation because, you know, he's as plugged in as anybody in the SEC. And, you know, basically, like, I don't know what, like more than half the league is on the bubble right now. I mean, Alabama, by the way, is one of those teams that doesn't have a great win-loss record, but because, again, of the stuff that I talked about, playing a lot of road games, a lot of neutral games early, the computers love them. I don't think they're going to get in, but I don't think it's inconceivable. Mississippi State's another one. You mentioned South Carolina. Arkansas was playing really well once Isaiah Joe came back, and then they lost on Saturday. You mentioned Florida. So, no, I'm with you, man. It's a crazy year. And I will say, you know, it's been crazy all across college basketball, but there are teams in other conferences that are doing what they need to do to get comfortably in the NCAA tournament. You know, Virginia beating Duke this weekend, USC sweeping the Arizona schools right down the road from where I am. But then there's the SEC where literally exactly like you said, Jacob, every time we feel good about a Florida or Mississippi State or an Arkansas or whoever, they just shoot themselves in the foot. By the way, we'll make for a fascinating week in Nashville. But to your point, I don't know how many of these teams are actually going to hear their names called on Selection Sunday.
Talking to Aaron Torres of Fox Sports. As far as the SEC and how it's kind of fallen as a group, I mean, a month ago you had how many teams from the SEC in the NCAA tournament to what it is now? And then my other question is that, there's really no super team this year. It's kind of anybody's game. In your opinion, how many teams going into the NCAA tournament really have a chance to host that trophy at the end?
Yeah, so to answer the first one, it's funny because it feels like the SEC's pretty comfortably been at the 5-6 seed kind of, threshold, but it's been different teams every week. I mean, I'm telling you, Mississippi State for a while looked awesome. Then they lost some bad games. Arkansas was obviously playing really well until they had some injury issues in about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Fell out and haven't been able to get their way back in. Right now it does feel like the top 3. Florida is still probably in pretty good shape. Again, another team the computers love. And I hate how we put so much weight on, computer metrics rather than who's actually winning and losing games. But, I think the SEC ends up with about 4. But to your guys' point, it's been about 5 or 6 all year, and it's trending in the wrong direction for the league right now. In terms of the second question, it's funny. I've been saying this, and I actually heard Jay Billis say the same thing this weekend. So clearly, he's stealing everything that I'm saying. But we talk about how wide open it is, and I actually think he brought up a really good point. Is that it's wide open in the sense that the best teams can lose to teams that they wouldn't traditionally lose to, right? I think you guys have a team that's a perfect example of that. If LSU's a 7 seed and San Diego State or Louisville's a 2 seed. LSU can absolutely hang with that. LSU can absolutely beat those teams outright. So the top teams can lose more than they've ever done before. But I think in terms of the teams that can win it, I still think that history tells us it's probably going to be a number 1 seed or a number 2 seed. And if it isn't, it's going to be a team that has a player like Miles Powell or Obi Toppin or somebody like that can put their team on their back and lead them to a championship. So I still think the field is probably about 10 teams that can win it all. But I think even within that number, it's flatter than it's been, as in, like last year, there were probably 10 teams that could win it all, but there was probably 2 or 3 at the top, specifically Duke, that you knew were better than even Team 7 and Team 8. And I don't really think there's that much of a difference between, say, Team 1, if we think that's Kansas or Baylor, and Team 10, 11, which is Kentucky, Seton Hall, Louisville, somebody like that.
Aaron, who do you think the best team in the country is right now? Do you think it is Kansas? Because for Baylor, really, for a long stretch of the season, and what before that was a crazy season, they held their own. They won games, and then down the stretch, they've lost a couple. You don't really mark them for losing to Kansas, but then they lose to TCU, and San Diego State's got the UNLV loss, and Gonzaga had the BYU loss. So do you think Kansas truly is the best team in the country?
So it's weird. And this is going to sound contradictory, but I think they're the best team in the country, but I also think that they probably have the most obvious weakness that can be exploited of all the good teams, which is that big center that they have, Udoka Azubuike. I forget what it was, but 23 and 19 or whatever it was against Baylor. That guy's a 43% foul shooter. And I was amazed that against Baylor, when they kept feeding him the ball, that Baylor just let him dunk the ball without fouling him. And so, I just sit there and I think some team is going to be savvy in the tournament where, it's a 2-point game with 3 minutes to go, and they just start taking the air out of the ball and sending somebody to follow that guy and make them beat him, make him beat them. And so I do wonder, does it come down to a scenario where Kansas can't play its best player in the most important moments? I think they're the best team, but I think they also have the biggest flaws. Gonzaga, I think, is right there. I still like Baylor. I know they lost again this weekend, but, this is a team. It's weird. Like last week, what was it? February 29th, the game was, and it was the first really bad game that they've played all year. So I still think those teams are really good. And, I think those teams are probably the 3 best right now.
All right, he is Aaron Torres, joins us every single Monday. You can follow him on Twitter at Aaron_Torres. You can catch him on Fox Sports Radio. You can also listen to the Aaron Torres podcast. Any way you find your podcast, he will be there as well. Does a great job. Aaron, we always appreciate time, my man.
All right, Jacob. Thank you both so much. Have a great afternoon, guys.
All right, we'll catch up with you next week.